Hey, everybody, this is Mike Belcito, co-founder of Product Collective, and we're back for another industry webinar. I'm excited to be here today. This is going to be a good topic because I feel like this is a topic that we're probably all sort of susceptible to making these mistakes we'll be talking about, and I'll get into what mistakes I'm referring to. But yeah, so thank you for being here. Before we actually start the session, I want to get into a little bit of housekeeping of what this is going to be about. And then I'm going to introduce our guest for today. But these industry webinars, these are really a great way for us to learn from product leaders all around the world. And it literally is all around the world today. So I am in a different place than my guest. We'll find out where our guest is from, but I'm tuning in from Cleveland, Ohio. Almost as always, sometimes there's a little bit of variance here, but I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. So you'll notice at the bottom, there's a Q&A and there's a chat. In the chat, why don't you open that up and choose to everybody so everybody could see and share where you're tuning in from. So again, I'm Cleveland, Ohio here in the US, but sometimes it's just fun seeing people from all over, and I'm seeing it come through New York, Houston, Toronto, San Francisco. I see the UK, I see Argentina. So it's awesome. It's people from all over for sure. So thank you for that. You'll notice also at the bottom, there's a Q&A section. So different than the chat. Now that chat, by the way, aside from sharing your location, later on when we're in our conversation, feel free to, continue chatting. Maybe you hear something that you want to add an anecdote about. Maybe you just want to make a comment, do so right in the chat. But if you have questions for our guest, you can use the Q&A section. So that Q&A section, I'll be monitoring that throughout. Probably take most of our questions towards the end, but if you have a question right now and you want to load it into the Q&A section, I might take your question in the middle of our conversation. So feel free to load up questions there as well. And yeah, so these industry webinars, again, we dig in on a whole number of topics. I should get into today's topic and today's guest. First, I want to give a big thank you to airfocus. The team at airfocus is sponsoring this particular webinar, but they've been a partner of ours in the past. They've been awesome to work with. And so I just want to say a big thank you to airfocus. I'm going to share a little bit more about airfocus when I follow up with everybody via email, because after the session, probably later today, early evening, my time, I will share the recording of this. So if you miss anything, don't worry about it. I'm going to be sharing that recording with you. So keep an eye out for that. And we're going to go, my guest and I will probably have a conversation that'll go to the 30-minute mark. And then we'll go another 10, 15 minutes for questions. So the whole session probably go to the 40, 45-minute mark, just to give you a heads up on that. But with all of that, I do want to introduce my guest, and I want to get into the topic. And speaking of that topic, we're going to be talking about customer feedback mistakes, the most common ones that are made. And again, I'm positive that I will be guilty of all of these mistakes we'll be talking about. But to dig into this, we have from the team at airfocus, Andrea Says, somebody that I've known for quite a while. I have Andrea every fall helping teach my class. I teach an undergraduate product management class at Case Western Reserve University. I have Andrea as a guest speaker every fall, including last week. So Andrea, it's good to see you again, and thanks a lot for being here.
Thanks, Mike, for having me here. Yeah, so we've been friends for a very long time now, and I join you every year, and it's super exciting to be here as part of Product Collective.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. And I wonder if any of the students are tuning in. Well, I'll have to look at the attendee list after to see if anybody is. Maybe I'll give somebody some extra credit if they are.
Extra credit, yeah, I was going to say that.
But for now, I know we have a lot of folks with us that aren't students. They're just active product professionals hoping to learn about common customer feedback mistakes. And maybe to get things started, Andrea, I'll ask you about customer feedback in general. Why, in your opinion, is it so critical, especially for product teams?
I mean, I'm sure everyone here knows, and I don't have to state the obvious, but customer feedback allows you to understand, from your customer's perspective, what issues they're having, what struggles they're having, what frustrations they're having. And it's really important to remember that at the end of the day, we're building products for them, not for ourselves. So it is absolutely critical for us to have as many conversations as we can and listen to what they have to say.
And today, in doing that, really there could be a whole host of ways that we're getting customer feedback. I mean, there's the sort of one-on-one interviews. There's also now platforms that exist for us to collect feedback. Could you talk about maybe some of the more common ways that product teams collect feedback from customers today?
Yeah, I like to make a differentiation between what I call collecting and gathering.
Mm.
And maybe this is because there is a differentiation and it's sometimes not so clear. So gathering is the process in which you go out and get it. And there's so many methods and tools and ways to do that. And my advice is always don't stick to one. Do as many of them as you can. Because if you only start focusing on one channel, then people are not going to want to engage with you. So do it through sales, do it through marketing, do it through support, do it through intercom, do it through Zendesk, do it through surveys. I mean, whatever channels you can, use all of them. Like, do not limit yourself to just one. But collecting is a different thing. And collecting is, once you have it, where do you put it and how do you track it and how do you understand it? And that's a different thing. So you can have as many tools as you want for gathering and getting those pieces of feedback. But when you select the right tool to collect it, I usually advise that you have a tool like airfocus, where what you can do is put it in a central place that is also connected to your product backlog, because feedback at the end of the day is there to really support the problems that you want to solve. So if you've got feedback in one place and then your product backlog in another place, it's going to be very, very difficult to really use that to your advantage.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I want to get into the topic, the title, rather. It's common mistakes that people make when they are collecting feedback. And I remember you had an essay that you wrote a while back. Is prioritizing feedback a thing? And in that, you talked about some of these more common mistakes. So I'm curious if you could, let's dig into those. So if you were to break down those 4 common mistakes, I guess let's just start with one. You don't need to name all 4 right off the bat, but maybe give us that.
We can start with the title
and let's dig into that.
We can start with the title, which is, do you prioritize feedback? And I see people, a lot of companies making this mistake, which is, oh, well, how do I prioritize feedback? And the thing is, you don't prioritize feedback. You understand feedback, you track feedback, you use feedback to support your product backlog, but you don't prioritize the feedback. If you're prioritizing feedback, what you're doing is you're essentially just managing feedback requests. And you're acting as an agency. And you're inevitably putting yourself in this space where you're not looking at discovery, but you're, in the words of Melissa Perry, literally going into that feature build trap. So don't try to prioritize feedback. What you perhaps want to do is segment feedback. That you can do. You can understand what type of customers are giving you feedback, what industry they're from, what persona, if they fit any, is giving you that feedback. And that, at the end of the day, will allow you to then understand the problems perhaps a little bit better from their particular industry or perspective, or whatever the factors might be. But feedback is really there to be connected to your product backlog and understand problems. So if you have 50 people that are telling you they're struggling with a particular problem, but you just have one customer that may be paying you a little bit more than those individual users or those individual customers, but not those customers as a whole, that's when you have to make the decision of which problem is more important, the one that gives me the desired outcome of X, or is it really just trying to get money fast? And we all know as product managers that, if you go for that one feature request that the person with the most money is trying to throw at you right now, you're going to waste time, gain technical debts, and it's just going to be a nightmare. So that is the difference between understanding a problem and using feedback to support it, and run discovery, and then just prioritizing feedback. You don't want to prioritize feedback. You prioritize the problem and you use feedback to understand it.
I like that. And that helps. It helps sort of create this distinction, because sometimes we might think, well, the more we're hearing about, this piece of feedback coming in, maybe we need to bubble it up to the top. But it sort of depends on the problems we're trying to solve for, it sounds like. Is that right?
Absolutely. So there's sort of what's called top down and then bottom up. So if you're approaching things top down, you're looking at what your objectives are. And then you're looking at your problems and saying, well, do any of these problems, can we define or experiment with solutions that might give us that desired outcome? So an example would be, if we are looking at expanding our revenue or expanding our growth, and we understand there are certain problems with perhaps our onboarding, which items can we look at that might help us drive that up a little bit? And likewise, if you then have problems that are starting to receive a lot of feedback, and you're kind of saying, okay, there's something here, perhaps we need to pivot a little bit and see what we can do about that, then you're going bottom up from the feedback as opposed to starting at the top. Both are valid. There's no wrong or right approach. It kind of depends on so many factors.
Yeah.
Objectives, direction, market research. I mean, there's a lot that goes into that decision, but you have the ability of understanding it from both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, that's great. Let's see, I'll get into another mistake, maybe mistake number 2. And, I know sometimes when we talk about voting on things and, it sounds very democratic, that could be a positive, but I read that voting might be a big mistake here, at least when we're talking about customer feedback. Is that right?
Yeah, so I say this a lot, and I don't know if it's an unpopular product management opinion, but product management is not a democracy. You're not there to run popularity votes. You're not there, to be the cool guy and do what the people want. That is politics. What you want to do is understand what your problems are, focus on your vision, and drive through those desired outcomes. And you're not going to do that by trying to please everybody. So voting is a mechanism that is great for engagement. I'll admit to that. It's great if you kind of want to rally people around, potential ideas. That's great. But what it's not going to allow you to do is understand what the problem is. You're also, by having votes, you're introducing bias. And I don't know if everyone here is familiar with the Pareto principle, but essentially what you're doing is you're allowing the 20% of the loudest voices to handle or drive through the 80% of the features that they want. So it's that 20-80 division. And likewise, what tends to happen is if you go to a website and you see the first 20% of the items that have the most votes, you're probably just going to keep on voting for those, whereas probably the thing that you're struggling with the most is on page 15, but you're not going to find it and you're not going to go look for it. So you're going to give up really quickly and go, well, everyone's voting for this. I might as well just go and do it. So voting introduces bias. Voting is really just running a popularity contest, and it's not going to allow you to really understand problems, and it can lead you down the wrong path. And one of my favorite examples, and this is not a diss at the company whatsoever, I think they've handled it really well, but if you Google HubSpot Pony, the first result on Google is a request for HubSpot to build a pony. And it's a very passionate request by this customer, and it has 300 votes. And you would think that they would just go ahead and build us a pony, but they haven't.
So, I mean, hey, if people are clamoring and asking for this, like
you must do it,
right?
They should be doing it. So obviously this is a very funny example, but now think about it from a more serious point of view, is what happens if people start rallying around you building a particular feature that they want.
Right.
But it's not really something that fits your product vision or fits where your company or your product is going. And another way of thinking about it is, let's say that you run a popularity vote and you're like, hey, does everyone want a Salesforce integration? And you're like, yeah, sure, that sounds great. But then you actually start running discovery. And it turns out that you were about to build a Salesforce integration when what people actually wanted was an entirely different thing. So you should have perhaps focused on, how do we integrate with CRMs? How can we help our customers with that? Maybe it's not even an integration. Maybe it's just, you should have some sort of profile. but you went to the opposite end, which is let's build a completely separate feature. So you have to kind of navigate these dangerous waters, and voting can absolutely lead you down the wrong path.
Yeah, it almost goes back to that, like, I just think of group feedback sessions, focus groups, where somebody might say something, then it's just easier for others to say, like, yeah, what that person said, it almost promotes this group think kind of way of going about it. So I think that makes a lot of sense to me, for sure. I want to take a quick pause here on going with the third and fourth mistake. I did get an audience question come in, and thank you for that, by the way. Keep those audience questions coming in. I might take more of them towards the end, but I definitely would love to get one in now. The question was, how do when you're thinking about customer feedback, how do you distinguish between wants and needs? And maybe I'll add from sort of the need to haves versus the nice to haves, where you might be getting feedback on something, but sometimes it might be hard to tell if it's really meaningful, really strong, or is it just like, hey, this would be a nice to have. What's your take on that?
Well, one thing that I really like is stack ranking. And it could be that you use that approach and just go, okay, well, you've expressed that you have these 4 problems or 5 problems. If you have to pick 2, which ones would you pick? And that immediately just, forces the user to think about the actual problems, and they have to run negotiations with you, essentially. So that's a really great way. And we tried it at airfocus a little while ago. And I was like, hey, let's say that we could, approach 3 problems. What would it be? And it was absolutely not what the team thought it would be. It was completely something else. I'm like, but this is why we do it. This is what we ask those questions, right? And obviously, it's not like we just went and built it. We had to run discovery. We had to understand the problems, but we just said, tell us what your 3 top frustrations are. Whatever it is, just tell us. And themes started coming up. And it was very, very clear that people had some very, very specific problems, and we had to address those problems.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I want to get back to those mistakes that people make when it comes to customer feedback. And I remember one of the mistakes is even what we're calling it to begin with. What is it that we're collecting? And so I'll go to you. What would be that third mistake?
The third mistake is calling it a feature request. So let me take a step back. As product people, the words that we use and how we express ourselves has to be very precise and very considerate, because we can set certain expectations with how we have conversations with others. So when we use the word roadmap, for example, people might have certain expectations about what a roadmap is, right? A lot of people tend to gravitate towards timelines when what we actually mean is perhaps an outcome-based roadmap. The same thing goes for feature request. If you use the term feature request, what you're doing is you're saying, give me a request for a feature that I can build. But that's not what we actually do. What we actually do is we take in feedback to understand the problem that we might solve. So changing that wording can change the conversation and the tone of the conversation that we're having. Unless you're in an agency. If you're in an agency, go ahead and call it a feature request. That's fine. But if you're in a SaaS product or you're managing a service, then what you take in is feedback. And this kind of leads to the last problem, which is a feature request means that you're either saying yes or no. Yes, I'll do this. No, I won't do this. But if you're calling it customer feedback or user feedback, what that does is, again, it changes the tone of the conversation for you to actually have a conversation. So then you're asking, okay, great. So you said you were struggling with this, or you asked for this. Could you tell me why? What is it that frustrates you? What problems are you seeing? How might we do this better for you? There's an array of questions that you can follow up with, but the important thing is that you're asking those questions and you're opening yourself up to that conversation. And it's 2 very, very different ways of handling those problems.
Yeah. Well, what I like about that is it helps better set expectations too, right? If we're
of course
treating it as, feature request, that sort of opens the door for the customer to come back and say, hey, So
Hey, is it
when am
done?
I getting that feature I asked for?
Exactly.
Like
Exactly. And that's what you want to
we're
avoid.
not short order cooks asking for
Exactly.
restaurant
Exactly. That's
orders,
such
right?
a wonderful way of putting it is you're not a restaurant. You're not taking in orders. And then you don't just say, sorry, we ran out of eggs. We
Right.
ran out of features. Like it's not how it works. How it
Right.
works is you take in that feedback and then you figure out how you might solve those problems.
Yeah.
But you're not a line cook. So
I like that. That might be the basis of an essay sometime, like why product people are not chefs, and we could kind of dig into that more. I like it.
yeah, it's a good way of thinking about it.
So we've covered 3 of the big 4 mistakes. What is that last mistake that product people often make when it comes to customer feedback?
Yeah, I kind of touched on it briefly, which is saying yes or no, and that
Mm.
leads to the feature request thing. But I also think that product managers are taught a lot about saying no. You must say no to this. You must learn how to say no. And again, that when it comes, if I go back to my previous point about how we carry conversations and how we set expectations with others, if we're teaching young product people to just learn when to say no, they almost become this source of negativity for everybody else. Because then the rest of your team, what they're going to see is that you're always going to say no to stuff. That's not really the product manager's job. The product manager's job is to say yes to the right things at the right time, but they also need to have conversations with people. So instead of constantly saying yes or no, have conversations with people. Have conversations with your stakeholders, with your board members, with your stakeholder. I don't even know the words that I've just used, but just talk to as many people as you can. And that's really what I want people to take away is you're not managing feature requests. You're not prioritizing feedback. This is not a yes, no restaurant order, right? What you're doing is you're receiving a piece of feedback, you're understanding it, you're having conversations, you're running discovery, you're running experiments, but it's not just yes or no. And there's no such thing as a stupid piece of feedback either. It's if you feel that way, then I would encourage you to perhaps develop a little bit of empathy for the person that you're speaking to and going, okay, well, why do you think that? Why do you feel that way? And that can just allow you to uncover like a million things you perhaps weren't even aware of.
Yeah, you're striking a chord with people in the chat here. Somebody had said, I feel like why is a better response than no.
Exactly.
And somebody said,
why or what problems?
yeah.
Tell me more. Exactly.
Somebody just said, tell me more. Right. So which again, great points in the chat there, because then that helps us open up a conversation with the person. So no might shut off a conversation, but the why or tell me more, maybe that opens up a conversation, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I'm going to come back to some of my questions. I actually just have a couple more, but we've got a lot of audience questions coming in. So I want to get to some of these. And this is a good one. So, we talked about why we don't want to even call it a feature request. And there's reasons for that. But there might be times where a customer, even if we don't call it a feature request, the customer might say, here is a feature that I want. And so the question is, what is the best way to sort of respond to that? Say we are sitting down with somebody and maybe it's not something that who knows? Maybe this feature ends up getting done. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe we never even consider it. But is it just that, do we respond just like we were talking about before? Is it the, hey, why? Tell me more. Is there anything more to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, the audience has said some really great things. Follow it up with, tell me more. Why do you like this? Why do you want this? Today, I got a message from our CRO saying, I like this page. And I'm like, okay, but what do you like about this page? Could you tell me why? Like, what are the elements that you appreciate? Like, what is attracting you to this page? And I had to ask a lot of questions because in his mind, in his context, and that's something that's really important to also understand is people have their own context, right? Everybody comes with their own set of biases. So when you're having a conversation with someone, particularly when it happens in a remote setting, and my team is fully remote, a lot of people think that they've told you everything, but a lot of it is conversations they've had in their head. So it makes sense to them, but it might not make sense to you. So keep asking those questions and keep digging, and until you get to, I guess, as much as close to discovering what the problem might be. But the more questions you ask, the better.
I love it. I love it. There, somebody else in the chat added, maybe saying something like, "And what would this feature do for you?" I like that too. Might help us get there. Another audience question was, and I think you did touch up on this a little bit, but if there's more to add, do you have any suggestions or best practices for moving from customer feedback to focusing on the problems? They said, I know laddering or 5 whys might be popular, but is there also anything else to keep in mind? Any other recommendations you'd give here?
Yeah, I mean, I think start with having a place where you can manage things. Like I said, that is connected to your product backlog. I mean, airfocus does that. There's a variety of product tools that can allow you to do that. But what you want to do is establish a process, and that's really important. So what happens when your customer success teams or your support teams get it? Train them to ask those questions, train them to ask why, make sure that they're also involved in that process, because it's going to make it a lot easier when you work together, so that they're also not treating it as a feature request, but they're involved in this process of asking those questions and changing that conversation to feedback. And once you get it, then what happens? I usually recommend, again, having some sort of process where you go, okay, well, we tag it with something, or we look for that problem in the product backlog, and then we link it so that we have that insight and that context. Do you then move it to another status? Again, it could be that when you first get it, it's new, then it moves on to, being processed, or, whatever words, open is another very typical status you might use. And then once that particular problem is solved or that feature is released, then you need to close the feedback loop. And that's another reason why you want to connect your customer feedback to your product backlog, because you now have this opportunity to look like a freaking superstar. Like, can you imagine getting an email from a company you send a piece of feedback to? And it doesn't matter if they reply 3 days later or 6 months later. The fact that someone acknowledges you and says, hey, you sent us this piece of feedback, we heard you, this is now available. That is really cool. Like, that is really, really great engagement. And again, even if it comes 6 months later or a year later or 3 years later, you have an opportunity to re-engage that lead or re-engage that user and go, not only did we not forget about you, we heard your feedback, this is now implemented, give us a second chance. It could be that we've now solved the problem that you were experiencing, and you can now use our platform.
Yeah, that's great. By the way, a couple of people have been asking, will this session be recorded? The answer is yes. And so by the end of the day, I'll send out a recording to everybody, or an email with a link to the recording to everybody. So if you need to cut off, if you missed anything, don't worry about it. We got you covered. This is being recorded. So I just want to mention that. And I want to go, I have a couple more questions to finish things off, but I'm going to take one more audience question here, which is, so the question is, when we're getting customer feedback, what should we value most? And they kind of give us 3 options here. They talk about viability, feasibility, and desirability. So I'm understanding, when we're getting feedback from customers to maybe take action with this feedback, that sounds like it's on maybe specific features, but what's your take on this? When you see a question, when you hear a question like this, if we should be valuing viability, feasibility, desirability, or a balance, like how would you approach it?
I think it's too soon to tell. And I agree with you, Mike. I think if you're receiving a piece of feedback, it's too soon to attach a value to it, because you don't know what the problem is. You don't know how many other people might have the same feedback or are experiencing the same problem. So when you're thinking about value, viability, feasibility, desirability, desired outcomes, potential risk, all of those things, that comes on the problem level. So what you want to do is make sure that you understand that problem first, and then see if other people are experiencing that same problem. And then you can start asking all those questions, and assessing if the problem is worth solving and if it's worth you investing your, product and development time on it.
Yeah. Got it. Thank you. Let's see, going back, we mentioned the 4 big mistakes that product people can make when it comes to customer feedback. Of those mistakes, do any cause more damage than the others? Like, is one the worst kind of mistake you can make and the others are shortly, following after, or are they all just equally bad? Let's stay away from all of them, do whatever we can to not commit.
Are you asking me to prioritize? I would certainly say that asking for votes and trying to prioritize feedback are the two that are the most damaging. Because again, what you're doing is, by asking for votes, you're asking for popularity votes. You're not focusing on the problem, and you're not giving yourself the chance to really ask all those questions. You're just saying, vote for these things. That's not going to help you. And then again, when it comes to prioritizing feedback, what you're doing is you're prioritizing feature requests. You're not, again, giving yourself the chance to understand whether something is actually a problem, or if it's someone just saying, I want a dark mode UI. Go into Patrick's question. And I want to jump to Patrick's question really quickly, because I thought it was really interesting. And it's, what if it's a really clear request? Well, let me ask you then, what problem are you trying to solve by having dark mode in your UI? If you're not able to answer that question, then you're handling a request, you're not solving a problem. The problem might perhaps be it's not accessibility friendly. That's a problem to solve, which then means that dark mode is one way that you solve that problem. But perhaps you can have a variety of other ways in which you can also solve that accessibility problem. So that's why we always ask why and what problem are we trying to solve? And we always start with that. What problem are you trying to solve? Because again, it looks like a very clear request, but if you can't answer what problem it solves, is it really a problem?
Yeah. Yeah, I like it. And it might, yes, maybe the customer in that case, in their mind, they need dark mode, but there could, and maybe we will give them dark mode, but there could be other things that we could have been giving them in addition to that to try to get at that problem too. But if we're not trying to really understand that core problem, we would never know, right? So I like that. Exactly. I think that's a good way to approach it. Let's see here. So since I already asked you to prioritize those mistakes, I'm not going to ask people to vote on the mistakes, because I know I already committed one right there. So I'm not going to commit the second. Let's see if I guess, how can we, I mean, short of, and maybe the answer is just this, but I was going to say, short of us, now we know these mistakes, we know what to look out for, we're going to try to avoid them. Is there a way to sort of get on the right track with customer feedback though, like to start doing it the right way? I guess we could jot these down and just make sure we're not committing these mistakes, but is there more to it than that?
It depends. It's such a difficult thing to answer. Start by, if you already don't have a product tool, again, get yourself a product tool, get yourself a tool that allows you to connect that feedback to that product backlog and that product backlog to that roadmap, because it's one system. You don't manage feedback separately. Absolutely not. Just like you don't have a static roadmap. I'm sure plenty of people do. I know plenty of people do, but you should never have a static roadmap on a spreadsheet or a PowerPoint slide, because then how do you support that with your product backlog? So all of these things are connected to each other. I would say start there, start by centralizing everything in a place where it's not just for you, but it's a place where you also open that product management process to everybody else. Because a truly product-centric, customer-focused, I'm going to use a lot of buzzwords right now, outcome-focused team, in order for you to be there, you have to be transparent about how product management works. And you're not going to achieve that by siloing people out of it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it. Let's see, we're all, well, let me ask you this. You mentioned tools, and that was a question. Somebody asked a question about what tools should we consider using when it comes to customer feedback, which, we could get real basic. Then there's some tools that are made specifically for managing customer feedback. Can you talk a little bit about tools that people could keep in mind?
Yeah, and I mentioned at the beginning, there's a difference between the collection part and collection and tracking and then gathering. If you're looking at gathering, as I said in the beginning, don't silo yourself. You should use as many tools as you can so that people are encouraged to actually reach out. So do it through social, do it through email, do it through conversations. Intercom is a great tool. There's Help Scout, there's Zendesk, there's surveys, Typeform. I mean, I can keep on going. There's so many ways. Don't limit yourself. Like I said, the more opportunities you give people to reach out, the more success you're going to have in understanding what your customers are experiencing. And then when it comes to centralizing, a product tool like airfocus will certainly help. So you can centralize everything in a single place. Centralizing, exactly. Because it can be overwhelming. Imagine trying to, manage all these different things. You're never going to do it successfully. So send everything into one place. And once it's in this one central place, then you can have a process, then you can involve your other teams, and then you can say, cool. So we have these 5, 10, 15, 20 people that are asking for CRM integrations. Let's understand them. Let's categorize them. Let's create different opportunities out of them. Let's create a roadmap initiative that is around CRM integrations. And then we can start assessing, all these different tools that people may have mentioned, or frustrations that they have, or why they even need CRM tools in the first place. Like, let's start understanding this. And the great thing is that because you've been collecting feedback all this time, you now have a list of people you can start with. Like, you don't have to start from scratch. And you can have that opportunity to reach out to people and talk to them, and then maybe start expanding to other user segments, whether it's potential leads or, I love using LinkedIn, and I'm sure you've seen my posts, just be like, hey, we're running discovery. Tell us about this problem you're having.
I love that though. No, it's sometimes maybe people on that front end, they avoid using some of those platforms out there because they are intimidated by, okay, but how am I going to manage all this? But if we do use that tool that helps us centralize everything and track it lets us be a little more open on that front end. So I think that's great feedback. Thank you for that. Well, maybe to close things out, because we are getting towards the end of our time here. I always like asking this question in the end, because sometimes these sessions, we're learning a lot. There's a lot of great info, but oftentimes it's that one thing that sort of sticks in our brain. And sometimes it comes towards the end. So that's why I like asking this at the end. But if there is one big takeaway that you hope people can get out of this session today, what would you want that to be?
Oh, just one.
Or two, but hopefully one or two.
One or two. Yeah, the first is, again, don't prioritize your feedback. You're not taking it feature requests. Use that feedback to understand the problems that you're having. That is really what it's about. You're not a feature factory unless you are a feature factory. But try not to be a feature factory. You're not handling this as a yes or no situation. If I had to pick one, it would be open yourself up to talking to people. Because that's really that's the magic sauce in product management, is talk to as many people as you can and ask as many questions as you can.
Got it. Well, Andrea, this has been awesome. I know there might even be some questions that we didn't quite get to. Is it okay for me to share maybe your LinkedIn or something like that when I follow up with folks if they have more questions?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'll email everybody with that, along with the recording of this session, so you can revert back to it. And information on airfocus, because I know there's a lot of great resources from airfocus as well. So I'm going to link to some of those. So keep an eye out, everybody. And thank you for taking the time to be here with us. All of you in the audience tuning in. I know everybody's got a lot going on, especially product people, right? So thank you for that. And Andrea, thank you so much for being with us again.
Yeah, no worries. I see a lot of really awesome questions. I wish we had the time to answer them. But if you have any questions, if there's anything I can help you with, Mike will send you my info. Definitely very happy to chat and answer any questions that I can. And thanks, Mike, again for hosting this.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Andrea. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.